We have had a huge diversity of interest in this project. Some of the best have been perhaps some of the oldest. I spoke to one woman in Tain, and she could remember the pylons being erected so that Thurso and Wick might have the electric light, and she was delighted that we were taking the industry forward in the way that we were. I'm Craig Milroy, I'm Stakeholder Manager for Moray Offshore Renewables, and really this event to promote the work that we're doing in the Moray Firth to develop offshore wind generation capacity and make sure that the people who will ultimately benefit from the market opportunities we'll create are aware of what those opportunities are and the timescale that we'll create them within.
You're just the man I need to speak to, Greg. I've been all around this conference and exhibition hall, meeting various people, but I've never yet come across anyone who's actually done what you've done, which is spoken to your ordinary community members about how they feel about renewables. So, but before we get to actually talk about that, I just want to ask you about Moray Offshore Renewables. And it sounds obvious, can you just fill me in there?
Moray Offshore Renewables is a joint venture company. It's formed by Aberdeen-based Sea Energy Renewables, who were born out of the oil industry and converted part of their resource to renewable technologies, and by EDP Renewables, the world's third largest onshore wind developer. They've chosen the UK market to develop offshore wind, and they see it as really being the pilot and the future for large-scale renewable power. So they've joined with Sea Energy Renewables to create Moray Offshore Renewables, and that's the company who will be developing 1,500 megawatts in the Moray Firth.
Okay, so you're stakeholder manager. This means you travel around a certain part of Scotland talking to people about plans by the company, what could happen offshore and things like that. What are people saying? Well, in fact, let's start this way. Where do you go, who do you meet, and what do they tell you?
The most important thing to bear in mind is that any form of development that happens, especially of a power generation or an infrastructure nature, is something that needs to be done with the communities that it will impact on and not to them. So right from the outset, our company made it a priority to make sure that we spoke to everyone on the coastal areas who will have an interest in our project and make sure they know what's happening and when it's likely to happen, so that we can get their feedback and input. They're, after all, the people who live there. So we undertook a programme of tours, ran from Wick right the way around to Peterhead. That's in the order of 250 miles.
And did you do that yourself, driving in a car, staying in hotels?
That's exactly what we did. We took... The other thing that we thought was quite important was we have a project team in the order of 20 or so staff, and we made sure that it was our project team, our own staff, who were speaking with the communities there. So we held, I think it totaled something like 110, 115 hours of consultation events, which was attended by just under 1,000 people, so that people had the opportunity to interact directly with people from the project and relatively senior people from the project. The project director was at more than half of those events. So places like the Elgin Shopping Centre, the shopping centre in Inverness.
And do you know who stops and speaks to you? Because I'm here today and I'm interested in the sector. The people who are here today, of course, are delegates who are involved in the business. So when you approach the man or woman in the street who's doing their shopping, for example, do they have any clue as to what you're about?
We have had a huge diversity of interest in this project. Some of the best have been perhaps some of the oldest. I spoke to one woman in Tain, and she could remember the pylons being erected so that Thurso and Wick might have the electric light, and she was delighted that we were taking the industry forward in the way that we were. Right to the other end of the spectrum, we spoke to school children, kids of maybe 14, 15, 16, in Inverness Shopping Centre, asking when was this happening, how could they get involved, and would there be a job in it from them. So interest from right the way across, but the predominant factor has been one of what economic development opportunities can this bring to everywhere from Wick to Peterhead.
Am I underestimating the imagination of the general public in that case? Because I'm saying to everyone I meet here, which is, do the general public really know about the renewables business? So my question is, am I underestimating?
The general public have an interest in electricity when it crosses their lives in one of two ways. One, when it impacts on them visually or through pollution, through a new power station, or two, when they don't have it coming from the light fittings in their homes. We're proposing something slightly different. We're far enough away from shore that the impact on most people living in the area is relatively small. So we have that as a benefit in terms of the interest that we receive. And because this is such a big engineering project, you can't install in excess of 200 turbines to create 1,500 megawatts of generation in the sea. You can't install that amount of concrete and steel without creating some form of local jobs. But what we really want to do is engage early and make sure that those opportunities are understood by not just the local communities but the local businesses who already have experience in working offshore, and they can capitalise, and they can only do that by being ready for the marketplace that we'll create when we're ready to construct.
Now, we're talking about engagement or outreach, if you like, with the general public. This fits in quite nicely, in fact, with an issue which I want to follow up on, and that's the Scottish Government's consultation called Securing the Benefits. And in there, Richard Lochhead, he raised three questions, one of which was, how do we ensure, or how do we hook up with local communities and make them aware and make sure that they share in the benefits? So it's, how do you link up the activities you've been doing with that consultation document? You're going to tell me they're exactly related, aren't you?
What I'm going to tell you is that it's important that both government and communities understand realistically from the outset what this industry can bring. And the biggest thing that this industry can bring is economic development opportunity. It's oftentimes seen in the past that the wind industry goes into a community and comes back out of it, installs its infrastructure, and the aspiration is some direct flow of revenue through some means back into the community. That's a fairly complex and direct route. What we are saying is that we're coming. We're installing a lot of steel, we're installing a lot of concrete. We're doing it 20 miles from shore. We will require boats, we will require vessels, we will require personnel, we will require fabrication, we will require set down, we will require land. All of these things need people. They need jobs, they need skills. The other thing is that Scotland is the first nation to be doing this at depth. If we can create that skills base here in the northeast in a timely way, then it will provide Scotland with a legacy, not a legacy in money, but a legacy in skills, and a legacy that can be exported elsewhere so that we can lead the world in a renewable development.